The story of Ethernet is best told in personal stories shared by its very own creators, providers, and users. The Voices of Ethernet archive is dedicated to preserving Ethernet's oral history, recording pivotal events that may have been forgotten or remain unknown, through a collection of spoken records with the individuals engaged in the technology's global emergence as the foundation of Internet.
Today we'll talk with Gordon Bell, one of the people behind the Ethernet story, to hear his account and experience with an important milestone in the technology's history. So thanks for joining us, Gordon. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gordon Bell, and I was former Vice President of Research and Development at Digital Equipment, almost from kind of 1960 to 1983 with a 6-year sabbatical at Carnegie Mellon. And so I was here during the crucial period, and one of the, well, I'll say not crucial, but one of the components of the formation of the original Ethernet, commercial Ethernet, the commercial 10 megabit Ethernet is, that we all knew and loved at that time.
So what was the real driver to get you involved in Ethernet, right?
I got involved in Ethernet. That is, as one of the, I'll say 3 components, we were the creators of Ethernet, as it's known and loved today. In fact, Ethernet, the quote, first word use of Ethernet was in sort of 1973 with, I think, or maybe even 76, when it was patented by Xerox PARC. And that was a 3 megabit thing they called Ethernet, a line that connected their altos in a research environment. And so my connection there was in the story of Ethernet for digital started in really in 78 when we were first having some first discussions with Bob Metcalf, and then I say the first formal communication was a letter that I think Bob penned to Xerox PARC, George Pake, and then the head of Xerox Systems. And that was in the 9th of February in 1979. And the reason for all of that was that we had predicated a thing called the VAX strategy. And the VAX strategy said we want a way to interconnect all of the computers in a VAX environment kind of seamlessly, because each were, there were a lot of VAXs in a typical establishment or a lab or something would have a number of VAXs, and they all needed to communicate. So we needed a network to connect communicating time-sharing systems. Now, that's in comparison with the situation that PARC had, where they were exploring the redefinition of network architecture, where they were connecting communication personal computers. So, but by the way, it's important to go back and look at the history of when things were happening. And so 1979, my recollection is that, well, not recollection, the fact is that that was the Apple II, and the Mac didn't appear until 83.
So just want to ask a clarification question for some people that are even younger than me.
Yeah.
As I recall, the VAX was highly successful and almost everywhere. Do I remember that correctly?
That's correct. They were used so predominantly in as a personal computer by a lot of physicists that they created a special directorate within the National Science Foundation to establish some supercomputers, because all the physicists were using their own vaccine instead of having centralized supercomputers. And that was, a few people said that was ruining computing.
As I understand it, Ethernet became one of the technologies that enabled that strategy, because it was the way to build a cooperative distributed processing, right, without maybe the hierarchies you would see in Token Ring or something else.
Right, and without a centralized switch. The VAX strategy was all connected by, quote, a line we call the network, but we had no idea exactly what that network was going to be. The diagram that I, quote, sold the VAX strategy on essentially looked like it had a single bus that connected all of these computers at every of these 3 levels.
So you outlined the strategy with a vision. You knew what you needed from the network. You just didn't know how to build it yet. Right,
because we had 2 or 3 different networks that were in place within our research group, but none that were exactly like Ethernet. But what we did have was we had a strong software architecture called DECnet, and so we knew how they should talk once there was a physical media for them to communicate.
So was this the stage where you met that force of nature, Mr. Metcalf?
Sam Fuller, who was our virtually our kind of chief scientist, and Bob Metcalf got together, and I don't remember when I had met Bob, whether I'd met him earlier, met him at Park, might have done that. But, you know, we were very familiar with Ethernet and to some extent Bob. And so Sam and Bob, you know, I remember them coming into my office, and this would have been in late '78, and we were talking about the need, DEC's need for for a network, and Bob was, of course, promoting Ethernet as a possibility. And then I'll say the first really crystal thing that we can identify is a letter that I think Bob penned to Paik and Campbell that said, "Hey," and that letter came from me, but I think Bob wrote it, that said, "We would like to talk about how we could get access to the Ethernet technology. And then secondly, we would like to work with you toward the formation of a network standard." So at the time I'll say we were desperate. This whole plan was based on Ethernet, and we didn't have it.
Is this where the formation of DICS came through?
Our first meeting was at a AT&T site, a picture phone meeting service site in Boston and in San Francisco. So so we booked the thing for 2 hours, I think, because I said, I don't think we know more than 2 hours worth of talk. So our team and the Intel team had that 2-hour meeting, and basically kind of shook hands over the network, over the meeting service to agree to work together.
Do you think the bus structure was key to actually getting Ethernet adopted as a technology?
Yeah, it it presented a very simple looking network that, gee, if you, by the way, and we had had experience with this topology before. As you recall, all of the PDP-11s introduced a thing called Unibus. And the Unibus really, we sold the Unibus as something you can connect anything to this computer. You simply drop, make the interface, and you drop this hardware off. And so I think it had the same very interesting effect as the unit bus. The fact that it was a single bus and no extra hardware, no switches that somebody had to implement or whatever.
What do you think made Ethernet? I mean, Ethernet, when it started and where it is today, it's gone a lot of places. What do you think are the key things that made it successful?
Well, first off, a key one was, the open and free architecture. It didn't have any patent royalties associated with it. In fact, I think it was and there was also a letter that I wrote back that was somewhere probably in 1970, early 79, after the first letter that basically said, let's get our working group together here. Let's establish the working group now. And so I remember writing that. I think it was when Liddell visited us. And
was that the DICS working group, or was that the IEEE working group?
No. That was the IEEE working group was really an appendage. We had to, that was
Way later.
kind of worked on the side. Yeah.
There was the initial Ethernet, which you made the point was purely peer-to-peer, and you could get up and running easily. And then the follow-ons become where we start getting point-to-point, and it really takes off. Are you following any of the Ethernet developments today?
No, not really.
So it's got a little interesting. So I'm actually working on a project to do 10 megabit over a single twisted pair. At the same time, some of my colleagues are working on doing 800 gigabit. So what's interesting is there's this huge broad range. So whereas you started with, a network for a fairly specific task, now Ethernet has become, it's the default wide communication.
Yeah, right.
Did you see it going that big when you started, or was it just I guess you answered that, because I think you told me the VAX strategy really looked forward and foreshadowed a bunch of this.
Right. I'd say we just saw it as really having a standard as being very important, because what we were faced with was a radial strategy or radial architecture of SMA. And it was like, we wanted something like BigNet, not SMA. That was a critical part of it, because we really had to have something where you had the wiring was kind of ubiquitous, and that also the only alternative was, if we had to do something, we would have had to deal with all of the idiosyncrasies of all the communication line that we would have been in, I'd say, communication protocol hell. And that was not a place you wanted to be either, because that was, very slow moving. It was controlled by, I think, out of Geneva. And so it was an international body of that was telling you, and that was all point to point, and all highly centralized.
I think the other thing about SNA was the level of control that was being exerted. It wasn't built for peer-to-peer distributed. It was built to be controlling, and I think you wanted the ability to do the peer-to-peer because that's what was going to enable your customers.
Oh yeah, that was so much in the same way that telecommunication was all central control. That is, it was everything. You bought services that were radiated that you bought from a telecommunication company, and they connected the other end.
So I'm going to head towards wrapping up, although we could obviously talk for another few hours.
Sure.
Could I get you to give a slight plug for our idea of doing the Voices of Ethernet, because we want to tell these stories?
What I think you're doing here is great in terms of the Voices of Internet, of getting all of the people that have, basically oral histories of that. All I'm insisting on, make them validate the dates so we don't confuse things here. But overall, I think this is a great thing. As you look at, as you noted, when you looked in the computer history collection, there's a lot of really important people. If you type in Ethernet to the collection, there's several thousand hits that you get, and you get a lot of oral histories in there, including, Dave Boggs was there, one of the founders of Ethernet at Park, and a contributor to the 10 megabit Ethernet. So you've got all of that, and so I think it's really important to have a sort of a single. What I like about what you're doing is this is the Voices of Ethernet, and it's a single. It'll be a single source about Ethernet.
And so one of the things I'm looking towards is to get both practitioners who build this and also people who use it, just to get them a bit more context on the background, because I think that matters to people.
Oh,
right,
yeah.
So,
no, the context from my point of view of that, it was the whole company rested on this network that we had yet to build, and so we were in terms of motivation, we were motivated as though it was a life and death decision as far as I'm concerned.
So is there any final thoughts you'd like to give us on, you've had a very long, distinguished career. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with? I'm
delighted that, you're putting these stories of these last 40 years together on this particular one. I think is a major one, just because it's not only a dead story, because it has all the vibrancy in life. When you, for example, you look at the 5th generation, telecommunication architectures that go here or whatever, that Ethernet is also a part of that. So if you look everywhere, I'm not everywhere, you look anywhere, you see that, okay, how do you put Ethernet, or how does Ethernet go over that media? That's a big deal. By the way, Ethernet was a big deal in terms of the creation of clustered supercomputers, because I'm in, that's another community that I've been deeply involved in for.
I think I did see in one of your interviews you mentioning that you thought Seymour Cray was up there with von Neumann in terms of being a key contributor.
Oh yeah, no, Seymour Cray was the dominant architect for supercomputers for the first, from when he started in 1960 or 1959 up through 1992 or 93. And that's when clusters took over. And so he was the dominant architect of the vector supercomputer and made and then it was taken over by clusters that came and took over.
And those clusters were enabled by Ethernet, right?
Yeah, the first one. Yeah, the first thing called Beowulf. The recipe for Beowulf was you get a bunch of PCs and Ethernet and connect them all together, and now you've got a supercomputer.
Right. So on that note, I think I'm going to have to close up because otherwise I'm going to spend another few hours talking.
Okay.
So, Gordon, thank you so much for giving us your time. We really appreciate it. It's wonderful to hear your stories.
Okay, call me back anytime.
So be careful because we will. You sure?
Okay, great.
All right. So thank you. And again, this has been Stories from Gordon Bell on the Voices of Ethernet.
Tune in to hear other voices of Ethernet as we continue to document the evolution of Ethernet since 1973 and explore where the technology's story might go next. Thanks for joining.